Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Farbach. Now, more than a decade after independence, South Sudan faces one of the world's most severe and protracted humanitarian crises, driven by conflict, economic collapse, and recurring climate shocks. Now, in 2025, nearly 3/4 of the population will require aid, with millions displaced, widespread food insecurity, and alarming levels of child malnutrition, compounded by floods and limited access to clean water. Against this backdrop and what that situation will be in the coming year, we speak now with Aleksandra Czyrko, desk officer for South Sudan at Polish Humanitarian Action. Thanks for coming by.
Thank you for having me.
So let's talk about, this is a terrible crisis. Some people are saying it's one of the most ignored humanitarian crises. Why is that, and what is the most urgent need right now for the civilian population?
I think I would agree with this statement that it's one of most forgotten crises, mostly because of the numbers. If we look at the numbers, as you said, more than 3/4 of the population is actually in the need. And we can see that within the last year, it got even worse, because last year when the UN OCHA provided us with the needs report, we thought that it will be 9 million people in need. Now we already know that it's 11 million people in the need for humanitarian aid, and it's important to note here that South Sudan is home to 18 million people. So we can see that it's really big numbers, and it's a big percentage of the society. And these needs are very basic needs. Mostly it's food security, it's shelter, it's access to clean water.
Mm-hmm. But in all those fronts, I mean, we see some of the pictures there, we know the stories, it's just not enough, right? I mean, why is there the bottleneck? Is that because of this deteriorating situation, lack of cooperation on the authority level? Why this huge crisis there?
I would say there is many reasons. The situation got worse within the last year for few reasons, internal conflict and also influx of refugees from Sudan. We also experienced some big floods in South Sudan, and then it's followed now by droughts. Then we also have a big issue, I would say global issue, of funding cuts that we experienced for the last year. So it's a very complex situation. I would say the cooperation in the country, it's quite good. We focus on coordination with the UN, with local authorities, and also other organizations on the ground. So I don't think that would be one of the reasons, but when it comes to the country and the situation itself, it's very complex, and we could see many, many reasons.
Mm-hmm. And let's look at also some of the specifics. I mean, there's obviously an urgent need. When you can't do much against flooding, that's a natural cause, but that also doesn't make your work any easier. So tell us a little bit about what direct impact, what kind of projects are you currently with PAH doing there on the ground in South Sudan?
We mostly focus on food security and livelihoods, and on WASH. And WASH is a water and sanitation and hygiene project. So we focus on access for toilets, for clean drinking water, and then we also focus on education on how to use these. Because if we provide a toilet for the community, we should also explain how to use it to make sure you stay safe and healthy. So we mostly focus on these two components, but not only. We also provide some support for Sudanese refugees, like I mentioned. And in these projects, it is mostly about basic needs such as shelter. So for example, we would provide sleeping mats and blankets to make sure that this person has a place to sleep.
Mm-hmm. And I think also the scale is massive. You mentioned earlier about almost 20 million people displaced. I mean, I'm sure there are many camps and different types of places that are very temporary. Mm-hmm. So are you focused right now just on the immediate need? I mean, it's such a huge task. What are you doing in terms of maybe something long-term? Is there even time for that, or are you just right now basically plugging the immediate concerns?
That really depends on the moment. For example, we started some projects at the beginning of the year or even last year where we focused on long term, but then we had to introduce some immediate responses such as the Sudan crisis response. But we also do have some projects for long term. We're finalizing actually these days, and we focus already on reporting for that one. But it's a project funded by UN OCHA where we focused on so-called microgrants. So in this project, we supported community-based organizations like small businesses, for example, and we helped them develop business plans. We helped them make sure that their business is running for the next years and not only for this period of our project. And we could really see in this project how the community started to grow. They started to support each other because there was above 20 community-based organizations, and we connected them with each other. So for example, if one lady had a vegetable store and another one is selling tea, they could actually cooperate. So it's really nice to see that we can help community grow, and we can make sure that the aid we provide will stay with them for a longer time.
But at the same time, with so many people displaced, I mean, the idea, it's all so fluid, right? I mean, even if you're helping those people, how does that impact those people and the civilians mentally? Are you doing any sort of support with them psychologically? Because I mean, it's a lack of water, it's a lack of basics. I mean, that surely must be really heavy on the mind.
I think it's important to mention here that humanitarian workers, we always kind of provide some psychological support, because we have to be aware that this person might just need a person to talk to. Even if it's not a core of the project, psychological first aid always has to be in place. So we always have to be prepared that our beneficiary might come up to us and just want to talk. And sometimes for them, this conversation with you, even if it's like 5 minutes, it's really helping. And that's something that we should be aware of, and that's something that we really focus on when we also decide to where we're going to work or what role we want to have in PAH, because of course not everybody is ready to give that support.
But I also imagine, like, if you're coordinating, I mean, maybe you can tell us how many people that your organization has on the ground. I mean, an aid worker, that's a difficult life, that's a challenging one. What about staffing there? Do you have enough people there on the ground? How long are these rotations? How long do people stay there? And ultimately, how are they prepared? How do you prepare them to go to such a place? I mean, this is probably one of the toughest areas to actually be in.
I agree. It's quite tough sometimes. In South Sudan, currently we have around 50-60 staff on the ground. And I would like to mention here that most of them are local staff. We only have, I think, 3 or 4 internationals. Most of the staff is from South Sudan. Some of them are even our beneficiaries. For example, they received aid from PAH like 15 years ago, and now they are the ones who can provide help. And for me, it's really beautiful how from receiving help, from being a beneficiary, you can actually gain knowledge and you can help others later on in your life. And when it comes to rotations, as always, it depends. Sometimes the staff stays for a year or 2 because they move on to another crisis, another project. But we also have staff who stayed with us for like 10-15 years. So it really depends. It depends on your role. It depends on how flexible you are as a person, because of course, let's remember that humanitarian aid workers are also humans, and they also have families. So if we have our staff in Juba who has a family and 3 kids, he's not gonna be so flexible to change jobs, of course. So it really depends, but we have both cases, honestly.
Okay. And I think both cases, never mind who that is, it seems to be also quite a dangerous occupation. If we just look at some of the news in the last few days, I think it was, there was actually a person working for the United Nations who was killed. So I mean, the security situation is, let's say, becoming more intense. At what point is there a danger for aid workers? Is that danger always there? How do you deal with that? I mean, this is a serious threat in South Sudan.
I would say there is always a risk, and it also comes with the job. You should be aware that as a humanitarian worker, you will be at risk. But in PAH and in most of the organizations that I know, we just take security measures and we make sure that this risk is as low as possible. And in Juba, for example, we have a few measures like that. For example, we have a curfew. We always move around with a local driver. We have to know the context of the place that we go to. And for example, that's also part of my job. If somebody from Warsaw is traveling to Juba, I make sure that they understand the context, that they understand what is the current situation and how to make sure that they can stay and feel safe over there.
Okay. And also looking into 2026, obviously, as we said, unfortunately, this is one of those almost forgotten, overlooked areas of humanitarian crises in the world. But what are your expectations, or your hopes rather, for 2026 for South Sudan and generally also Sudan and the wider region for humanitarian aid?
My biggest hope would be that my job is not needed, to be honest. I would love for us to have a world where humanitarian aid is not needed, but that's a big dream. I would say that what we want to focus on and what the whole humanitarian world wants to focus on is the localization of the aid. Because as you mentioned, these long-term effects that stay on the ground, we focus on cooperation with local organizations, with community-based organizations, to make sure that we share the knowledge and that we build their capacity to help on their own as well. Because the humanitarian aid might end someday, or the funding cuts really affect all of us, all the organizations. So we want to make sure that the local community knows how to continue this good work that we do now.
All right, so it's not just about plugging the immediate gap, it's also building for the future in a very tough part of the world. Look, thanks so much for coming in. That was our guest here today, Aleksandra Czyrko from Polish Humanitarian Action. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more news and commentary. Goodbye.